jumping on to continue a conversation that I started on the weekend about what it is I do in my legal practice, which is help people have babies. I know it sounds like something a doctor typically does, but I do it on the legal side of things because my clients are getting assistance in growing their family. So we call it assisted reproduction. Mainly the way this plays out in most of my cases is the surrogacy process, where one woman is carrying the child for another person or couple, and the plan is to carry the child a full term, and then the couple leaves the hospital with their beautiful baby, and they have all the legal rights to do that. So we've kind of jumped into it, and I've been talking about exactly what goes into that process. I laid out a framework that I use that I walk my clients through, and I talked about there being three main themes that you need to have a handle on before you embark on this journey, before you take the first step down the surrogacy path. And so I want to pick up the third of the three themes today. Again, all I'm giving here really is a 30,000 foot view to help people who have been interested in it or who may tangentially be interested in it or are thinking about the process or just curious about what goes into the process of surrogacy, or someone getting help growing their family with the help of a gestational carrier or someone carrying their child for them. So this isn't anything that is, you know, uh, down to the details, but I want you to have something so that you're at least armed with enough knowledge that you can start asking the right questions. So let's look back into where we left off and what I want to cover today, and hopefully it'll be a quick video. So I said that I have three T's for surrogacy, or three T's to surrogacy. There's three main themes that you have to have a handle on. And you have to have an understanding of your team, your terms. The third T that I said you have to have a handle on is tact. So we talked about team a couple days ago, and I said you have to select your squad. You got to assess their approach, and you need to recognize their role. Well, nothing's changed there. We talked about the terms on yesterday. And in terms, I said you have to define the details of everything that's going into the agreement for the surrogacy process. And there's agreements all over the place. There's agreements between yourself and your surrogate, yourself and your service professionals. And there's also maybe an even unwritten or unspoken a lot of times, which I don't think it should be unspoken, but a lot of times it goes unspoken. There are terms between spouses or partners going through the process together. So you have to have an understanding of those details. You have to really define them. Second thing we talked about is ensure that you are insured, talking about the issue of insurance and at least having an understanding that you need to ask the right questions about what to do with regards to insurance. Is your surrogate insured? What are you going to do for insurance for your child once the baby's born? Get a handle on that kind of thing and make sure you know what the game plan is around the issue of insurance. And the last thing we talked about with terms was prove your parenthood. You have to prove that you're the actual parents. And I talked about that's the second phase of the legal process of surrogacy, where you actually get a court order that declares you the rightful parents of the child. So let's look at the third T. Let's look at the third T. And I called the third T tact. And you say, tact? How does that factor into anything that's seemingly like legally based or contractual based? What does tact have to do with it? And I think that tact has everything to do with it. Do not judge my circles, because clearly I'm not a geometry whiz, but you get it. This is supposed to be a big circle. But when I talk about tact, or when you hear the word tact, you know what the word means. It means, you have an awareness, a sensitivity when it comes to dealing with others or dealing with difficult issues. And the reason that tact is such an important part of the surrogacy process, important enough for me to make it one of the three T's, is because whenever you're in a situation, be it surrogacy or anything else, where there's a large expenditure of finances and there's a large or a high output of emotional energy, which goes into, growing your family and having a baby and fertility and any conversation around that issue. It's a lot of emotions that are flying. Whenever that's the case, you really have to be aware of your sensitivity in dealing with others or dealing with a difficult issue. Because let's be honest, infertility is a challenging issue. It's a difficult issue. Now, we're talking about solutions to get you through the challenge, to get you through the issue, but at the end of the day, it's still a difficult issue. So when there's a lot of money being invested in the process, a lot of emotions being invested in the process, a lot of time being invested in the process, there are going to come times when your tact will carry the day. Yeah, for sure. We worked through the terms, right? You assembled your team. You worked through the terms. The black and white on paper looks great. But what I often tell clients is we're going to do everything we can to make sure that every I is dotted, every T is crossed, and the terms of your agreements are as ironclad as possible, as it can possibly be. But at the end of the day, there's a person with emotions on each side of that contract that has to actually commit and dedicate themselves to carrying out their responsibilities in the agreement. And so sometimes well, let me say it like this. I think a lot of times we can accomplish with relationships and tact what is, which is not accomplished as effectively with legalese and having your lawyer call somebody else's lawyer or something like that. So that's what I'm talking about. That's the foundation of tact. So how do we break down this third prong, tact? So I say first, with the issue of tact, you need to communicate your concerns. Let me get my pen situation together. You need to communicate your concerns. When I say you need to communicate your concerns, what I'm saying there is there has to be a conversation that happens at the very beginning of the process. There has to be a conversation between yourself and all of your service professionals, yourself and your surrogate, and yourself and your spouse, your partner. You have to make sure that you've communicated everything that you want to happen in the process. Honestly, all a contract is a memorialization. You memorialize your intent in writing. But if you haven't spoken about that intent, if you haven't communicated everything that's on your mind or everything that you expect to happen, then the contract is not going to be effective as it should be, because it can only be as effective as the intentions that have been stated. So if you haven't stated, if you haven't talked about, if you haven't communicated your concerns, then that's going to create a huge problem in the future, because expectations that aren't managed lead to disappointment. But if you haven't communicated the expectations, then there's no way to really know. So you have to communicate your concerns, and that plays out in a number of different ways. One thing that I always advise my clients, even on the parent side, there's a lot of controversy in my little small bubble of why would parents need to speak to a mental health professional? You can't judge whether someone's ready to be a parent. My answer to that is it's not about judging or having an intended parent or hopeful parent speak to a mental health professional to judge whether they are fit to be a parent. It's about helping them work through the mental processes, the emotional issues that come along with the process of assisted reproduction, and making sure that they're aware and that they're prepared to handle those things on an emotional and mental level. So you want to communicate your concerns with a mental health professional. You want to communicate your concerns with your agency. You want to find out exactly where they stand on the things that are important to you. You want to communicate your concern, of course, with your fertility clinic, your fertility doctor, reproductive endocrinologist, and your attorney. So make sure that you're communicating your concerns. I think you get my point. We could go deeper, but again, it's a 30,000 foot view. So the first part of the tact prong is communicate your concerns. The second part is to, I'm glad I made this big inadvertently, because this is really important. Care for your carrier. And I'm talking about your gestational carrier. Care for your carrier. Care for your carrier. If you think about it, with all the time, emotion, and money that you're putting into this process, in order to grow your family, in order to have a baby, it would appear or it would seem that the person who's carrying that baby is carrying the most important part of your world. And I think most people would agree with me as saying that. So the carrier really is, no, not, she's literally, actually, figuratively, in all cases, she is holding your hopes and dreams in her womb. And yes, she has a legal obligation to do it in a particular way. Hopefully, you and your attorney have worked through um, things she's prohibited from doing, things that she agrees to stay away from, things that she agrees to do. I've had intended parents ask for all kinds of things that they want their surrogate to do or not do. And, you know, when it's a match, the surrogate agrees to do or not to do those things. But aside from what's in the contract and aside from what she's signed her name and agreed to do, you should have a relationship with this woman. You should care for the carrier. She should feel as though you're appreciative of what she's doing, the same way that you should feel that she's appreciative of your being a part of the process as well. I think it's a two-way street, and you really have to work through how to have a positive relationship with your surrogate. Now, to that end, your agency should help facilitate that. If you don't have an agency, that's just going to be more work on you, but you still have to make it a priority. You can also talk to your mental health professional about ways and strategies to go about creating and sustaining a healthy relationship with your surrogate. I believe really that this is one of the most important pieces of the puzzle. Anytime I have clients who have a good relationship with their surrogate, typically the process goes smoothly, and there's no speed bumps or hiccups or anything like that. So communicate your concerns, care for your carrier, and the third part of the tact prong is to arrange for arrival. Arrange for the arrival. You want to make sure that you've discussed that amazing day, the delivery day, the birth of your child. Uh, you know, the same rules would apply. The same rules apply to you as if you were actually delivering the baby yourself. You need a bag packed by the door. You need, to have taken a hospital tour. You need to know exactly, where the delivery, where the maternity ward is. You need to know where the delivery rooms are, where your room is going to be. You have to work through all those things, and it takes a level of tact to work with the medical professionals and the hospital administration to make sure it's all in place. But there's also another piece of this that plays into tact when I talk about arrange for the arrival, and that's talk through how the scene is going to play out once the baby is born. Let's not let that be a surprise. Is the surrogate comfortable with your being in the room? Is she okay with you being in there for the actual delivery? What about if something happens and the hospital administration only allows one non-medical person to be in the room? A few situations I can think of are, if there's the need for a C-section, typically, well, that's going to happen in an operating room. And typically operating rooms, are very strict in how many non-medical, non-essential people can be in the room. This it's an operating room, so it has to remain sterile and clean and clutter-free and not overcrowded. So maybe they only allow one person, but there's two of you. Who's going to get to go? Does her spouse get to come in to support her through a major operation and you wait outside the door? We don't want to wait until the day of to think about these things. So there's a certain level of tact that goes into discussing and coming to a conclusion on these decisions. Also, if maybe the hospital room's just small, maybe it's just a small hospital room, and the hospital, by their rules and regulations, they only let one non-medical, non-essential person in the room for delivery. So make sure you talk about those things. Also, let's continue to play out this delivery scene. So the baby's born, the delivery happens, the baby comes out. You've discussed whether or not you get to actually cut the cord. Let's say you do. You cut the cord, and now where does the baby go? the baby should go into your arms. In most hospitals and hospital administration, they understand this, and they know you're having a surrogacy birth, so they expect that. But does the surrogate get to visit with the baby before you guys are discharged from the hospital? What you'll find is that many professionals believe that it is psychologically healthy to at least allow the surrogate some amount of time to get closure on the matter, to see the baby, maybe to hold the baby. Maybe her children have questions about mommy, what was going on, and she can explain to her children, mommy helped this baby, mommy carried this baby for this couple or this person, and now mommy gets to give it to them, and they get to have that moment to work through that. But at the end of the day, she gets to bring a close to that chapter of her life. Have you thought about that? Have you discussed that? That's not something that you want to leave up to the last moment and figure it out in that moment. So think about that. There's some other things that we could dig into, but that gives you enough to start asking questions and start thinking about these issues before you get to it. So let's sum up the tact issue. We talked about communicating your concerns, caring for your carrier, and arranging for the arrival. And I know you're probably thinking, Corlendos, wait, but what are these other little pieces of intersection where, the team and the tact and the terms meet together? So let's kind of walk through these, because I think these these are important too. So when you have your team assembled, you've got your squad, you know their approach, you know their role, then I think that where that intersects with the tact that we just discussed, then you have your perfect baby bodyguard. These are the protections. You're protecting your investment. So I call this your baby bodyguard. Your process, your hopes, your dreams. When you have the right team and you're carrying yourself with the right amount of tact, then you're protected in the goal of having your baby. Where your team and your terms intersect, you've defined the details, you're insured, and you've proven your parenthood, and you have that connected to your team. That's what I call the immaculate mullet. The immaculate mullet. You guys know what I'm talking about. You know what a mullet is. It's the hairstyle with the short in the top and the long, popular in the 80s. Look it up. Google it if you don't know. But the mullet, the idea of the mullet was that it's it's business in the front and party in the back. It was short in the front, nice and cropped, but it was long in the back. So business in the front, party in the back. I run into this most times when I'm dealing with couples who have a relative caring for them. So someone whose sister is carrying the baby for her, or whose cousin or whose best friend is going to serve as the surrogate. A lot of times they're saying, well, we don't need a contract. We don't really need to define our terms. We really know, I love them and I want to help them, and that's great. But let's handle the business in the front, the contract, the terms, making sure that you do have the right team surrounding you. That frees you up to enjoy the process of the pregnancy, to enjoy the experience over the course of the next 9 to 12 to 15 months, depending on how quickly you're able to get pregnant after you handle the business of the contracts. So handle the business up front so that you can party in the back. That's why I say that the intersection of your team and your terms is the immaculate mullet. And then, oh, you know what? I mixed up something. Let me go back. We're live. So, I gave you the wrong intersection here. So the baby bodyguard is the terms and the tact. The terms and the tact is, that's the baby bodyguard. Sorry, I wrote it in the wrong space. So, yeah, and that makes more sense, I'm sure. when you have the right terms, and you're carrying yourself with the right tact, you're intending to abide by those terms, that's when you have the baby bodyguard. Okay. Now, where your team and tact intersect, I call that the village. The village. And of course, I'm referencing the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. And I mentioned before, I think, that if it takes a village to raise a child, it definitely takes a village to have a child through assisted reproduction. There's so many moving parts, there's so many people involved, there's so much that goes into the process that it's unmistakably a village. And when you have your team in place and when you are carrying yourself with the correct amount of tact, then that's when you have your perfect baby making village in place. So, guys, that's my 3 T's for surrogacy. This is my framework for how to approach the surrogacy process. And each of these little pockets, there's a lot involved in that. So when you're looking at this, let this be a general guide for you. Let it be a general guide that gets you started in the right direction, gives you an idea of questions you need to start asking, issues you need to start thinking about, and things you need to ask your service professionals to unpack for you. So, with this, you have enough to at least start asking the right questions and having the most effective conversation with people about embarking down the surrogacy path. Well, listen, as I said, always, you can find me, at my website, pinnaclefirm.com. You can also just message me here if you have any questions. I'm always happy to help. One of my passions, clearly, is to help people grow their family. I'm fortunate and honored enough to have 2 little ones myself, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. All the things that went into um, becoming a parent and being a parent on a daily basis, the good, the bad, the challenges, or whatnot. And I wasn't in the position where I had to work with a surrogate, but knowing what I know now and having these 2 beautiful babies in my life, if I had to go back and do it all over again, and I knew that was the only way, there's nothing that would have stopped me from making sure that I brought those 2 humans into the world. So, listen, I'm rooting for everybody out there who's working towards growing their family. If growing your family through surrogacy is something that's on the horizon for you, feel free to contact me with any questions. Hope you guys have a great day.